Well, yeah, my name is Bellarado. I'm a PhD student at the University of Arizona School of Anthropology, and I've been working the Four Corners for a while, and well, over the last couple of years I've been really interested in textiles, and especially really nice twine sandal textiles from the Four Corners. And but not just the actual artifacts, but the imagery that we find of textiles of various kinds in rock art and building murals. My interest in these materials is to look at the larger patterns of social networks, religious networks, communities of practice, and potentially ethnic boundaries that textiles can tell us about across prehistoric landscapes. Now, clothing is one of the best ways to signal group identity and community membership, as well as individual identities, as clothing is one of the most efficient ways that people signal their identities at many levels at the same time. We show allegiances, common interests, worldviews, all these things with our clothing. For example, if you look around right now, we can see the literal common threads that we use to show our membership in American society and the fashion of archaeology, if you will. Of course, Tom Wines is our role model for that. So, ancient peoples in the Four Corners and all around the world, but ancient peoples in the Four Corners did this as well, and especially with really highly ornate sandals. But the problem with clothing of all kinds in the archaeological record is that ancient communities of, or the problem with looking at clothing in ancient communities of shared networks of clothing styles, is that clothing by its very nature moves around with people from place to place. In the case of sandals, they literally walk away from their place of manufacture. As such, traces of clothing manufacture, use, and discard are largely lost to archaeologists. And also, as we know, clothing is by far and large perishable by nature, and to a large extent it is only recovered in bits and pieces from particularly rare archaeological contexts. Fortunately, in the Four Corners, particularly in the western Mesa Verde area in southeastern Utah where I've been working, ancestral Puebloans often decorated plastered surfaces of their buildings and homes with images of ornate clothing that they made and used in these household and super household contexts. And many textile images also appear in rock art in the area. In the canyons of Cedar Mesa and Comb Ridge, many structures contain intact building murals, and they're actually not as rare as one might think, but they're incredibly fragile resources. And increased visitation in southeastern Utah has really put these things at risk, which is one of the motivators behind my project. So the appearance of this imagery in building murals and building decorations is that once created, these contexts are fixed in place, unlike the actual textiles. So the distributions of these images can tell us a lot about the changing social networks of clothing styles across landscapes and over time. Building murals also can potentially be dated by looking at the construction styles of walls that they occur on, and by tree-ring dating the intact wooden roofs and wooden construction members still covering these buildings, primarily the roofs of kivas with intact building murals on their interior. So along these lines, this summer I began the Cedar Mesa Building Murals project, which I'm attempting to create an inventory of intact building murals across the Cedar Mesa and Comb Ridge landforms, taking particular note of those sites with structures that have potentially, or that have the potential to be tree-ring dated. Funding for my work this summer has been provided by a generous scholarship from the William Self and Associates Scholarship Fund at the University of Arizona School of Anthropology, which has allowed me to purchase a range of equipment and paid for my field time. And Don Simonis at the BLM Monticello Ranger District has helped me to get a permit to conduct this field work and to take tree ring samples from structures with building murals and intact wooden roofs. So I've been walking out on the landscape across Cedar Mesa for the last couple of months, recording sites and revisiting sites all over Cedar Mesa. And many of these sites can be accessed fairly easily, while some you need ladders or ropes to get into. And that's always a lot of fun. So I've been working on and off with Tom Wines over a few years, and this summer I've kind of taken my own branch, my work on a different branch a little bit. But I'm working with Tom, and we're trying to get a lot of these sites out there treeing data. So then for what I've done over the last 2 months is I've visited about 40 sites, and eight of the major canyons of Cedar Mesa, and many of them have building murals. And a lot of these building murals aren't necessarily painted. A lot of them are incised into the plaster, and there's often multiple layers of plaster that have different types of textiles incised into the surfaces of the kivas and some other structures. So after a brief delay in getting the permit to actually take the tree ring samples, the last couple of weeks I've been able to take about 40 samples out of 3 sites. One Pueblo 3 kiva in particular has 8 layers of cribbing and then flat platform, which make almost perfectly intact roof. And there's about 150 beams in there, and I've taken 24 samples out of the different layers to try to really narrow down the date of construction for that kiva, maybe even some remodel dates, and then looking at the 4 or 5 layers of plaster in there, that several of which have these incised textile designs. Let's see here. And the textile designs in this particular kiva are these really ornately patterned twine sandals, which appear to be probably ritual dance footwear, and which show up with incredible frequency over on Cedar Mesa. They show up a lot in other parts of the Four Corners, but for some reason in the Pueblo 3 times, Cedar Mesa seems to be kind of a stronghold for where people are using these types of sandals, or at least they expressed their use of those in murals more often. So in this process of taking samples, it's something Tom and I have been working on for a couple years to try to narrow down the dating of the different styles and the distribution of these different types of murals, to look at, again, these networks of shared communities of mural makers and worldviews that they might be expressing. Sally Cole has also been a great help, telling me about sites down in Grand Gulch that I should visit. Another site that is of particular interest in Grand Gulch has a kiva and several habitation rooms that are wattle and daub in much the same style as Moon House, that I know a lot of you are probably familiar with. One of the walls in this wattle and daub room has fallen over, and it's particularly interesting because there are 8 sandals with toe jogs inscribed into the wet mud with a finger that have these really complex designs. So that was obviously made while the room was being built, and it has all this wood, so you think it'd be perfect. Unfortunately, all the wood in that site is cottonwood, which doesn't date. So there's literally hundreds of pieces of wood in there just staring at me, making fun of me. And it's pretty hard to get into alcove, so I had to scramble up this depth-defying slope to get up there and have all this cottonwood laughing at me. But another wall at this really neat site, in the wet mud of that wall, there's all these toe prints. Basically, it looks like maybe a family went and they were squishing the mud in with their toes, and one guy had a really big toe. But on top of those, it looks like somebody wearing a sandal actually squished their footprint into the side of the wall too. So there's actually a sandal footprint on the wall there. So again, it's kind of frustrating because there's not a lot of datable material, but there are a couple pieces of probably juniper in there that I'd like to get back into and take some samples from at some future date. What? Oh, great, only another page. So this fall I'm going to be working with the Tree Ring Lab, particularly Ron Towner, and I'm going to try to be taking all these dates that I've collected, and then also a bunch that Tom has collected, and try to get those processed, because I can basically do that for very little money because I'm a student. So I'm going to be in the tree ring lab cross-dating a lot of things. And then this year I'm going to be trying to apply for scholarships and grants to get back out there again next year. And hopefully we can create a really comprehensive inventory of the different styles of building murals across time and through space. These things are, like I said, beautiful, informative rare and highly fragile, and they're nearly forgotten to archaeologists. I guess I'm kind of running out of time here, but I just, in the end, would like to thank Don Simonis, the BLM, has been incredibly helpful. He and his wife are just so supportive to researchers out in Southeast Utah. Tom Wines and the Wood Rats, of course. My professors at University of Arizona, Winston Hurst and Sally Cole, Scott Ortman. And then I've had quite a few volunteers coming out and helping me. Some of these folks I've had to train, some of them just really know their stuff. But they've put a lot of work in. One map we did on this Kiva alone took about 15, 16 hours. And it was just one lady, Lee Uppengrad, and I in there. And they just put a lot of work in. So I guess in the end, there's this incredible amount of research potential in a lot of these areas, kind of on the periphery, especially in the periphery of the Mesa Verde region, that a lot of people don't really get to bite their teeth into. I've got some jokes, I'm not going to even start with them. All right, well, so if you guys have any other questions or want to see some pictures, I have a bunch of pictures with me. I'm more than happy to share them with you. And I'm also looking for preferably able-bodied volunteers to come out and hike and backpack to some of these just incredible sites that nobody gets to. Some of them haven't been looked at since Weatherall was in there, or if ever. So, all right, well, thank you very much.